Hello. I did want to do a disclaimer for just this video itself. I don't feel comfortable discussing certain topics on the parenthood and procreation article just because there's some concepts that could be against my religion. So I just wanted to do a little disclaimer. So I'll just be mostly talking about the Joshua Coleman article. So in regards to that one, on what I found more convincing in the article, more compelling was the examples of how in modern times, that specific example he gave of in 2014, more adult or younger adults living with their parents become more estranged than back then. I gave an example that back then those young adults would move out and live with their spouses, while nowadays they stay home and not so much live with their partners. And that could be many reasons, sense of lack of the concept of marriage. It could be financial status, etc., etc. But I've seen that specifically in relatives where young adults or mid to late 20s still living with their parents and finding this estrangement within their parents themselves because they are still viewed in the eyes of a parent as a child, but they're in fact adults and want to be respected and have some boundaries. What are some weaknesses that were presented on this particular article? I would say the accusation of emotional abuse. It kind of sounded like it was like, oh, this is a factual thing. When it could also be culturally. I know for myself, for Hispanic culture, sometimes abuse can be seen as comedic, and we laugh back at him like, ha 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 ha, or we learned from it, or this molded us to be, you know, carry life in this manner. But um, yeah, even in the concept of like physical abuse, like beating, we still kind of laugh about it. So I think it's different when it comes to culture itself. I would say it's a factual thing that emotional abuse is considered as a focal point of one of the concepts on why children become estranged to their parents. Because yeah. And then how does this text challenge or expand? I would say it expanded a lot, particularly because I got to see a different examples of each person's different scenarios of childhood and how that impacted them in their adult years and how their childhood looked like based on what their parents provided, either if it was physical, materially, or spiritually. Like the examples he gave of good intentions going to bad, how in the modern culture, um, there was a child who really wanted to be great at flu, and her mother helped her, really encouraged her during those whole times, and then later on estranged her own mother because due to that, she was an overachiever, and that affected who she was emotionally. Um, it's also a concept that in modern culture, um, we blame our parents for being over controlling. As a child, we don't know what's best for us to a certain extent, and it takes an adult later in life to really reflect on like, was this something really to cause a level of estrangement between my parent or I, or is this just out of like pure lack of parental emotional regulation? Another example he gave was a parent who overly loved their child to where they became an adult now and they're wanting to have this establishment friendship of like being their best friend, and give the comparison how back in the later times, parents were more busier with friends and hobbies, and now parents are more inclined with finding their friendships within their children themselves. Well, I can kind of see that because nowadays, it's been more common where a household is not fortified. We see a lot of divorced or separate parents, and parents at times do rely on their child for that emotional security, um, or to fulfill their love, because at the end of the day they sacrificed certain things for their children. um, they just overly love their child, and that's where they receive majority of their love, because their relationship didn't occur, or the part of their ex relationship isn't a reflection with their child. So all these like kind of thoughts just ran into my brain with that specific little thing. And then in regards to some tension presented in this article, I found what they said, how in the Western industries, democracy believes that society is, in a sense, responsible partly for providing happiness to a child, like resources, which I do believe it causes comfort, but I wouldn't say it is the the giving of happy life to the child, because at the end of the day, we've seen stories of, if you look into the history and indulge in the cultures of other countries, you find families that are really poor but are content because their family dynamic is very strong. So I wouldn't say that the Western material aspects of giving to the family is the responsibility of making the child happy. It's the parents, the values, um, and providing the best they can. How do the ideas present apply in the real world around me? Would say that it reflects on, and the general concept of reflecting on your own relationship with your parents, deciphering, if, do you have some certain unhidden resentment, is this out of, their own lack of emotional regulation? Was this because of their current state of financials during that time? Or we're just children, we just didn't really understand that the no, or the punishment, whatever that looked like during that time, was for the betterment for us. And also, as children, punishment could be seen 10 times greater than an adult. And again, that's that um, dynamic of um, misunderstanding of comprehension and dialogue, or that asymmetry that we've been reading a lot lately about. So yeah, I would say that particular article has been pretty intriguing, and reading a lot of things in different perspectives and reflecting on how many things can be seen in different points of view and reciprocated in many different ways. Thank you.